Hello everyone. Okay, so chances are you may not know about this if you only just started watching my videos recently, but this is actually the extremely overdue sequel to my Best Design Champions video that was released at the start of April. Today, I have another pretty controversial but probably fun topic that you guys will enjoy. Let's talk about the worst design champions in the current League of Legends. Just like the last video, I want to lay down some quick ground rules so you know how I'm devising the list. The statistics of a champion will not be taken into consideration because those can be adjusted at a moment's notice. Generally speaking, if a champion is overperforming, we can expect Riot to slap some nerfs within the next patch or two. Hopefully. Basically, strength doesn't always indicate bad design. A champion could be overpowered at the current moment while still having a pretty fair design. And just for the sake of keeping the video from being 40 hours long, I'm gonna only talk about 5 champions, the 5 that I think are legitimately terribly designed. Oh, and I'm also going to be bringing in some new faces since you're probably tired of hearing me bashing on how stupid Yona is, even though it's true. Lastly, before we even get started, I want to clear something up very quickly. Zoe, Seraphine, Akali, Aphelios, the 200 years champions that everyone hates to all hell, gameplay-wise, I don't think are actually bad design, quote-unquote, in terms of their playstyle. And don't worry, I'm not being held hostage this time. Most of the reasons why people hate Seraphine is because of her marketing and her lore and whatnot, but her gameplay is rather tame. Yes, she has an ultimate that can travel 5 miles and everyone talks about how she's a better Sona, but I would say she's a mild case. Same for Zoe. There's a lot of horse manure to her being able to one-shot you from across 2 screens, but that's literally the only thing she can do. She has a pretty one-dimensional kit because it consists entirely of her tossing her sleepy bubble and then following up with Q over and over. And in the end, both are skill shots, it's not a point and click, so Zoe players do have to get pretty good at aiming. Once you figure out the matchup though, she becomes pretty easy to deal with, all things considered. I'd argue if she didn't look like a spoiled 5-year-old brat, people wouldn't be nearly as upset with her. But anyways, let's move on to the actual list. First, and absolutely foremost, Lisa, I cannot believe you made me make a video talking about how Yuumi is the best champion in the game. The terms of that bet was not fair, I don't care what you say, and no, I can't delete it because it was part of a bet. So after making that video, I'm really excited to share my real opinion on her now that I'm not being held at book point. Yuumi is probably the worst design champion in the current League of Legends. That's an opinion shared by a lot of people, and I'll be spending more time talking about her than on the other 4, even though truth be told, she's not actually the strongest enchanter in the game. I still think Janna and Lulu are much stronger in a lot of cases. There are 2 reasons this cat gets so much more vitriol than other supports. The first is that she's the only champion in her subclass that isn't vulnerable to the main form of counterplay against enchanters. The enchanter class is well known for providing crucial utility to their teammates that wouldn't otherwise be available. Heals, shields, buffs, the occasional crowd control, and disengage. As you know, champions in League of Legends can only get so strong. They cap out at level 18 and can only buy 6 items. Spare a few exceptions like Nasus and Veigar, most champions in the game reach a stat cap and can't get their numbers any higher through conventional means. Enchanters are able to pile on more stats on their teammates through their abilities, which make them by far the best supports to have if a game goes late. To balance this, they have a very exploitable weakness, themselves. Enchanters are the squishiest and most vulnerable class in the game. Because they have really low durability and mobility, they have to walk a fine line with their positioning so as not to put themselves too close to enemy fire, but just close enough to support their teammates. Yuumi completely bypasses this issue by being able to latch right onto her teammates while remaining untargetable, essentially making it so you have to take down her companion to get to her. Problem is, and this is the second reason why so many people hate her, depending on who she attaches to, she makes it literally impossible for you to accomplish this. Worse yet, it's not like a specific group of champions that only benefit from this. Yuumi's vast array of utility helps every class in the game. She provides a shield, bonus adaptive force, a long-range projectile that slows enemies, a heal that gives both movement speed and attack speed, and a huge ultimate that can easily root targets struck. She solves 90% of all problems each classes face. She can attach to a big raid boss fighter like Set, Hecarim, or Aatrox and they solo 1v9 teamfights. She can attach to a fast assassin like Talon, Shadow Assassin, Kayn, or Fizz, and all of a sudden they have no counterplay. What makes things even more frustrating is that Riot genuinely believes Yuumi takes more skill than most enchanters. There was an Ask Riot Q&A where they defended Yuumi's design and had a few points to back up their case. So Scooch, if you're watching this, I need to borrow you for a moment.
But new things are, you ready? Identifying when it's safe to hop out and use her passive in chaotic team fights, which means tracking enemy cooldowns to know when to do so. Failure to use Yumi's passive at all means leaving a lot of value on the table in the form of shields and mana. Using her passive at the wrong time means getting CC'd and killed. You want to know who else in the League of Legends roster has to be scared of getting CC'd and killed in team fights? You want to take a guess? The other 154 champions. All 154 of them. All 154. Every single other champion in the game is doing this forever.
I hate it so much when people think a champion has counterplay and then have the nerve to say just CC them, like crowd control doesn't counter literally every godforsaken champion besides Olaf and Dr. Moondog. Yes, in order to make the most out of Yumi, you do need to detach an auto attack to get the shield and mana, but it takes only a second. 1 second to get off her companion, hit someone, and then get back on. And you compare that to Janna, Soraka, Lulu, Nami, etc, who have to remain in constant danger for the entire duration of a fight. Now, I will agree with Riot in their second point. Yumi can only support one person at a time. Before you say Janna can only shield one person or Morgana can only black shield one person, yes, but Yumi actually cannot use her E or Q for her teammates unless she's attached to someone, whereas Janna can put a shield on her AD carry while using her tornado to block the enemy mid laner, while using her Zephyr to slow down the low health enemy jungler. She can do a lot of things at the same time on different targets. However, considering the sheer amount of power she gives to one person while being immune to the one thing that makes enchanters hard to play is quite ridiculous. Yumi's positives far exceed her negatives because contrary to what Riot says, all things that make her difficult to play apply to every other enchanter. The only thing she doesn't have is on-demand hard crowd control because Final Chapter takes 1.5 seconds minimum to root, whereas Janna, Lulu, and Sona's ultimates act much faster. But again, if she attaches onto a super beefy champion like a Diver or Juggernaut, they can easily survive whatever burst comes their way, especially with your shield and heal. As I said before, in practice there are scenarios where Yumi is not the best support and other enchanters may help out their team a lot more, but there are a lot of cases where Yumi straight up solo carries the game by turning the Jax on her team into John Wick. Extremely high potential impact for how little risk there is in her playstyle conceptually speaking, and the only reason she's balanced is because she can only carry through the person she's attached to, and 99% of League players cannot carry games. I have a proposal. Make it so Yumi costs an inventory slot to attach to her teammate and she can't attach to anyone with the full inventory. Alrighty, that's enough with the cat. Let's actually cover the rest of the list, starting with Singed. Singed has one of the most degenerate playstyles in League of Legends, if not the most. It's been a long time since we've seen him, and fortunately he's not a very popular champion to pick up because of it, but he's not a good champion by Riot's design standard or most other people's. To play him well, you effectively have to avoid head-on confrontation with the enemy team. His laning phase consists of either proxy farming forever or flinging you into his poison and then running away. To his credit, Singed has a lot of tools that are really good to have on an anti-carry type champion. Poison Trail gives him on-demand zoning, and combined with his passive and ultimate buffs, he can create huge areas that are off limits in teamfights. Mega Adhesive is a heavy slow and grounding area which can cut off escapes or prevent champions with high mobility from dashing all over the place. And Fling is one of the best get-off-me tools in the game. In a vacuum, these abilities are all individually quite good, but together though, and you have a champion who pretty much trolls his way to victory. The primary win condition for Singed is to draw as much pressure from the enemy team as possible so his 4 teammates have more freedom to do whatever they want around the map. That's why he often proxy farms or invades the topside jungle. He basically forces his opponents to deal with him or else they will bleed out in farm and camps. Problem is, his playstyle in and of itself carries a tremendous amount of risk because if the enemy team is good at stopping his win condition, he can lose a lot more than he gains. In other words, his own teammates have to be very efficient with capitalizing on the team he gives them. When you're a champion whose entire game plan is to hope that your teammates know how to play around you and or the enemy team doesn't know how to play against you, that's not a good look, which just so happens to be a trait he shares with Yumi. Continuing on, Tryndamere, another very infamous champion. 2 things about him that suck. The first is his playstyle, the second is his ultimate. Champions like Tryndamere, Olaf, and Jax can be really aggravating to deal with because each of them has a mechanic that straight up invalidates countermeasures. Olaf becomes totally immune to any crowd control, effectively allowing him to run straight at the enemy backline without worrying about getting knocked away. However, he's easy to kite and doesn't have too much damage to break through shields for instance, so an enchanter can ruin his day. Tryndamere becomes unkillable, like actually unkillable. He can activate his ultimate even when knocked up, locked down, even suppressed or silenced, so chances are if Undying Rage is available, you have to play accordingly. Thanks to this, he can tower dive, face tank thousands of damage that no other skirmisher would be able to, and outduel so many people even if he's not fed. One might argue you can do the same thing with Olaf and just kite him out. That doesn't work either because of his spinning slash. Once he gets enough attack speed, crit chance, and cooldown reduction, he dashes every 2 seconds, so that's not an option. His damage output is far higher than Olaf's, so he can usually rip through shields or even exhaust. The only way you can easily stop him is through crowd control, so the obvious solution would be a tank, right? Nope. Tryndamere has so much sustain through his Q that he can shrug off most trades from tanks, who don't do enough damage to get him low enough to where he can't build up fury without dying. And in the late game, Tryndamere is able to split push so incredibly fast without worrying about getting caught out due to his high mobility. Even though everything I said sounds good on paper, like Singed and Yuumi, Tryndamere can only really find success if his team allows him to split push, since he's not the best in a traditional front-to-back teamfight. His uncompromising gameplay can be detrimental at times, since he doesn't really provide anything of value to his team other than his high damage and strong split push. That's not to say he can't teamfight whatsoever, but a lot of players would rather have a Maokai or an Ornn who can provide a lot of teamfight presence in the mid to late game rather than some guy smacking you with a sword. An extremely high DPS melee AD carry with some of the best combat mobility in the game, great sustain, and total invincibility for 5 seconds is terrible design. He actually would have been on my reworks video if I wasn't so concerned about time. 2 more to go. Master Yi comes next. He's a lot like Tryndamere, who's a lot like Singed, who's a lot like Yuumi. You're starting to notice a trend here, right? Master Yi and Tryndamere share a lot of similarities. Both carry huge DPS and both are unfathomably difficult to stop once they get ahead. Yi doesn't rely on crit damage, or at least he doesn't have to, and he doesn't have an ability that makes him immune to death, but he's sort of a hybrid between Olaf and Tryndamere. He carries the same amount of 1v9 damage as Tryn, and I guess you can say a resistance to lockdown as Olaf. Alpha Strike gives him 1 full second of untarget ability whenever he uses it, and has 2 things that allow it to be used multiple times per fight. Its cooldown is lowered by 1 second for every auto attack, and since Master Yi is all about getting lots of attacks per second, he can easily get another one up and running. The second is his ultimate Highlander, which has a passive that lowers his Q, W, and E cooldowns by 70% upon champion takedown. That's essentially resetting his abilities the way Katarina does for her passive. Then there's the actual Highlander buff, which makes them completely immune to slows or cripples. With these 2 abilities, he can avoid almost everything in the game, all while doing crazy true damage thanks to Wuju style. Master Yi is the ultimate feast or famine. He either 1v9s games or hard feeds. Thing is, even though there's a lot of hypercarry champions in the game, most of them have to fly very close to the sun and are always one mistake away from getting destroyed themselves. High risk, high reward. Yi does have periods of invulnerability himself, but his margin for error gets very small if he gets a kill early. All you need to do is watch a few Master Yi montages to know that this guy can pull off the same kind of face roll 1v5 pentakills as Katarina, only you literally cannot fight back against him because he's untargetable the whole time. I remember during the dark ages of Taric Master Yi Gold Funnel, everyone blamed Taric for being the issue, when the real problem is this guy. I know he's a really iconic champion and probably won't get reworked, but just like how Yuumi ignores the one weakness that makes Enchanters balanced, Master Yi ignores the one weakness that makes hypercarries balanced, and most hypercarries are not balanced, which makes him even worse. Finally, we wrap up with someone who I was thinking about putting on the hated champions list if I made it 5 years ago. Vladimir. Exactly like the first 4, he has things in his kit that he really shouldn't. It's not Sanguine Pool, believe it or not. I know everyone hates his W, but it's not the worst thing in the world, at least he's slow and immobile. Recently I made a video on manaless champions and talked about how more than 3/4 of them have incredible endurance. Vladimir is one of them. A ranged manaless champion who has near infinite sustain so long as he can attack something. Mind you, he's not Yona levels of BS, but Yona is in a class of his own. In his defense, he does expend a lot of health to use Tides of Blood and Sanguine Pool, which sort of offsets his transfusion healing, but the fact that he has the ability to regenerate his health while being a ranged champion is what makes him a badly designed champion. Kennen and Gnar are the only other manaless ranged champions, and neither of them have easily accessible sustain because ranged champions should not have built-in sustain in their kit because that's what they get for being ranged. If Vladimir so chooses, he could play a super passive lane and never die, preventing his opponent from building a lead while he scales super well into the mid and late game. Speaking of scaling, his passive. Vladimir gains bonus health whenever he builds AP, and bonus AP whenever he builds health. This makes him both stronger and more durable as time goes on like Malphite, but you have this property on someone who never has to recall. Malphite has no health or mana sustain, so he eventually runs out of steam if you can survive long enough, whereas Vladimir can play the neutral game almost indefinitely. I will say he's not as rage-inducing as the previous 4 because, at the very least, he still shares the same downsides as his fellow battle mages, such as being really slow and lacking combat mobility, so if you chain CC him, he's gonna explode. Compared to Master Yi, Tryndamere, and Singed, he can reasonably fit into other team compositions because he does still play sort of a traditional win con, but for a late game scaling mage, Vladimir is way too safe. Kassadin gets a lot of flack for being broken, but at least he's a melee champion who has to put himself in harm's way to even farm, whereas Vladimir doesn't. I chose these 5 champions because they either disregard the fundamental design constraints of their class, or they have a degenerate playstyle that can actually sometimes hurt their own team. I should remind you that a champion can have a notorious reputation among the community, but still be reasonable. Shaco, for instance, no one likes this guy, he's one of the most annoying champions to go up against, but let's be real, he's not one of those unstoppable 200 years. Good Shaco players have to be very tactical with him since he can't just run right into the middle of a team fight and explode everyone the way Vladimir can. And a lot of champions can shut him down one-on-one, whereas they can't with Tryndamere and Master Yi. Anyways, what do you guys think about this list? Do you agree with the 5 I've chosen, or do you think there's someone else who deserves to be on it more? Let me know in the comments down below. I think overall there are more good design champions in League than bad, but if you put every player's own personal experience and anecdotal bias, it would suggest all 155 champions in the game are terribly designed, but that's how it is. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe. Consider following me on my socials and join my Discord server if you'd like. Also, if you have some extra time, why not take a look at my other discussion videos? But thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Take care.